Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 2, Theories of Integration. And our topic is federalism. Federalism for long has been an effective organizing political principle, guiding power sharing and democratic linkages between different layers of government. With a focus on constitutional arrangements, it defines the competence of each organs of the government and safeguards the individual and collective rights. In spite of the universal acceptance, federalism it has no universally accepted definition as it does not emanate from a single source of theory or grand design. It is therefore subjected to extensive interpretations. Federal states in practice follow different patterns of federal arrangements. Nevertheless, federal polity is broadly attributed with certain characteristics. These include power over public policy is divided between federal or central government and regional government. The power to both sets of government is allotted and protected by constitutional document, which implies the supremacy of the constitution in the federal setup. The judiciary in a federal setup system is independent and settles disputes over division of power and constitutional priority. A written constitution is essential but not a necessary condition. In a federal setup, both central and regional government have coordinated powers and relationship is not one of superior, inferior. Both have responsibilities over public policy, although they are not necessarily exclusive. The government at the central level, however, might have a larger responsibility in providing identity, coherence, and protection of the system as a whole, and it has responsibilities on important areas such as currency, defense, foreign affairs, etc. Nevertheless, federalism provides for democratic participation of the units and the governance of large politics. Most federal states provide for bicameral legislatures at the central level, in which one house allows for participation and representation of the constituent units of the larger polity, although the extent of their participation might depend on the legislative autonomy they enjoy. Hence, there could be variation in the position of the constituent units across federal systems, depending upon the constitutional equilibrium in the polity. A large number of scholars and statesmen in European history, as well as in contemporary times, have envisaged the construction of Europe on federal lines as a way out to meet the requirement of the time. Many in Europe felt that the nation state had outlived its utility and alternative arrangements have to be devised looking beyond the confines of nation state. International law and transnational institutions were advanced as an effective mechanism to prevent nationalistic conflicts and to sustain democracy against authoritarian regimes in Europe. Such a line of thought existed earlier, as could be seen in the works of Kantorowicz, Kalecki, wartime leaders, resistance movements, and many others. But this came to be advanced forcibly after the end of the Second World War. Although opinions were divided on the precise nature of such institutional arrangements and modus operandi. Functionalists too had envisaged such institutional arrangements, but Federalists, unlike functionalists who stressed on process rather than end, form considered formal enumeration of institutional or constitutional arrangements as a prerequisite for transformation in the political order. Federalism is supported by many both as political movement and ideological perception to overcome the evils of narrow nationalism, which had led Europe to two world wars and loss of glory. Federalism also appealed to those who supported institutionalized pluralism and cultural diversity, as well as pacifists who, with a deep sense of humanism, opposed domination in any form. Therefore, federalism presented its case on the premise that popular participation and harmony among diverse interests in Europe can be better organized by a new institutionalized democratic arrangement at the European level, serving higher political purpose of all European countries. Nevertheless, the ambitions to construct Europe on federal lines was not an easy task. It received a setback with the defeat of European Defence Community (EDC) proposal in 1954, which had envisaged a federal setup in its European Political Corporation (EPC) component. Undaunted federalists like us Spanish began to pursue their agenda within a European community, and they were able to contribute significantly to the debate on future of Europe despite the jolt received from leaders like French President Charles de Gaulle and British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Today, a large number of elected members of the European Parliament and a section of academia have become great supporters of federalism in Europe. The federal idea prominently figured at the time of signing of Single European Act in 1986 in the deliberation of the Intergovernmental Conference in 1990-91. The Massachusetts Treaty in 1992 and in the debate on European Constitution in the beginning of the 21st century. Massachusetts Treaty on European Union in the particular brought the EU closer to the federal setup, and the initiative for a constitution for Europe was seen by Federalists as a vindication of their position. The Federalists therefore argue that the federalism is all the more relevant to the EU today in view of the European and global transformation. They also hope that an enlarged relevant EU can be better managed by a federal structure as federalism has inherent capacity to maintain the balance between EU and states. To them, sovereignty and responsibilities would be shared by the two in a democratic and progressive way, considering their effectiveness in specific areas, and this enables better decision making in the EU without depriving the role and identity of the member states. In fact, the supporters of federalism see basic elements of federalism already existing in EU. They are division of power between EU institutions and member states, treaties acting like a constitution and specifying competencies of each organ of the EU, the European Court of Justice acting like the Supreme Court in upholding the letter and spirit of the treaties and adjudicating disputes over the division of powers. Defined, though not exclusive, responsibilities on public policy and increased competency of EU on major issues, especially concerning economic and minority aspects, acceptance of union citizenship, and subsidiarity principle indicating the recognition of the legitimacy of EU and operation of higher political principle. However, critics point out that increased competencies of EU does not mean that EU has become a federal entity. At best, it shares responsibility with member states on certain defined areas. Member states are still the prime movers of the EU and its developments. They are still in charge of effective control over a large number of areas vital to nation state such as foreign affairs, defense, taxation, provision of fundamental rights, health, education, welfare measures, etc. Moreover, at the EU level, unanimity is required for important decisions such as enlargement, adoption of a constitution, etc. The European Union also does not enjoy power of legitimate physical force over citizens of its territory, indicating the absence of traditional features of statehood. At the people's level, nation state continues to be the points of identity and attachment. Therefore, especially as French and Dutch referendum in May and June 2005, respectively, on the European Constitution Treaty indicated that legitimacy of European institutions are still in doubt and Europe is far from the federalism. Now, the next point is federalism and evaluation. The uneasy experiment with federalism suggests the limitations of federalism in realizing its goals. The limitations could be broadly attributed to the following factors. preoccupation with prior constitutional arrangements and failure to evolve suitable strategies considering the exigencies of the time. The failure to evoke public response through sustained campaigns or awareness programs in civil society and federalist propositions and debates largely confined to academic and elitistic circles. Unresolved differences over strategies and form among federalists. While some federalists were uncompromising on the prescription of a constitution for Europe, others were suggesting shaping and advancing EU that would eventually lead to the adoption of a constitution in Europe. These definitional differences have only compounded the problem. While the British mostly considered a federal Europe as one with increased power of the EU at the cost of the nation states, others saw it from the dynamic sociological perspective in which federalizing process was present in every decision and shared responsibility operating in a non-zero sum way. Failure to advance convincing public discourse and logical explanation on the desirability of federation over intergovernmental cooperation. Nevertheless, European federalists and scholars are increasingly reflecting on the theoretical position with due consideration to the problems inherent in the theory as well as societal development. John Ponder, for instance, in what he terms as neo-federalism, advances incrementalist strategies to gather unifying forces and to lend legitimacy to proto-federalist institutions. This is in contrast to the classical federalism which emphasizes on outright construction of federal Europe with a constitution. So, the new federalism attempts to couple economic and political linkages with federalist concern for constitutional principles and problems. On the other hand, Alberta Strabrigia regards federalism as significant as an analytical tool rather than its normative principles. It represents institutional creativity or as a process of novel institutional building, not necessarily replacing existing institutional designs. Rejecting the obsession of the theorist with federalism versus intergovernmentalism, Shergia considered integration as a process creatively proceeding towards new body politic, perhaps towards the hitherto unknown body politic, without necessarily disintegrating the existing entity. In other words, Shregia federalist theory sheds new light on the politics of territoriality in the context of integration by institutionalizing territorial cleavages. In this case, at EU level, it recognizes them and not aim to eliminate or transcend them. All these new thoughts represent the refinement of federalist theory, which has significantly contributed to the European integration debate. Now we want to wind up this lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.